This video is about finding min and maxes and zeros of a parabola using a calculator and identifying the min, max, and zeros of a parabola from a sketch. So we have spent the last 5 units exploring linear relationships. We have used y equals mx plus b to graph the lines, write equations of lines, and find intersections between the lines. But starting now, we're going to move into a new major topic, quadratics. This unit is all about the graphs of a quadratic, and the graph of a quadratic is no longer a line. So let's look at what a quadratic actually looks like. So in the first equation, we have y equals negative x squared minus 5. So my y equals, I'm going to type the equation, negative x squared minus 5, and hit graph. So we see it's a u towards the bottom half of our y. So we have here our u shape facing down, and we're going to include arrows on both ends of it. In number 2, we have parenthesis x minus 6 squared. When we graph again, we have another u. We're just going to sketch a graph of that. And then our third equation, we have x squared minus 5x plus 6. We graph that again, we have a u. This time, though, it's going a little bit below the x-axis. So as you notice, they all had the same shape. That's because a quadratic has a degree, which is the highest exponent of 2. So the U shape is created because we have a degree of 2, and that U shape is called a parabola. So there's a couple of different parts of a parabola. The first part is zeros. So zeros are where the graph crosses the x-axis. These can also be called x-intercepts. And a parabola is either going to have 0, 1, or 2 zeros. So if we go back to our original graph, number 1 doesn't cross the x-axis, so it has 0 zeros. Number 2 went to the x-axis and then went the other direction, so that would have 1 0. And number 3, it crosses twice, so that would have 2 zeros. Another important feature of our graphs is the vertex. So in a parabola, we are either going to have a minimum or a maximum depending on how the graph opens. So a minimum is the lowest point of a graph. So in a U, it would be the bottom part of the U. In a maximum, that is the highest point of our graph. So the U would open up and down, and we'd have a maximum at the top. This last part then is identifying an f of x. So an f of x means that when the number is in parentheses, you are finding the y value at that particular x value. So, for example, if I had f of 6, that means I want to know what is the y value of the graph or the function at x equals 6. So let's look at some graphs that are already drawn for us and answer these questions. So number 1, we already have a graph for us. We want to know, does this graph have a max or a min? Well, it has a lowest point, which means it's going to have a minimum. So this is our minimum right here. To get the coordinates, we went over 1 to the right, so our x coordinate is 1, and we went down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So negative 1, so 1, negative 9 is our coordinate. Then, how many zeros does the graph have? So as I look at my graph, we see that it's crossing the x-axis in 2 points. So we have 2 zeros. The coordinates of those, the coordinate on the left is negative 2, 0, and then the coordinate on the right is 4, 0. So if I want to evaluate then f of 0, so at 0, I want to follow to where my graph is. What is that y coordinate? So that y coordinate then is negative 8. At 4, our y coordinate would be 0. At negative 3, we go up here. So our y coordinate is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And f of 1. So at 1, we went all the way down to our minimum, which means the y is negative 9. So let's look at another example. In number 2, when I look at my graph has a high point, which means it's going to have a maximum. So at our maximum, the coordinate would be 5, negative 2. How many zeros does the graph have? So this graph doesn't cross the x-axis at all, so it's going to have 0 zeros. which means we don't need to identify coordinates of them. If we're trying to find the f of a number value, so f of 3, here's 3. When we go to find the y coordinate, here's where our graph is, so that would be 7. At 5, the y coordinate is negative 7. At 6, we're at negative 3, and at 7, we're at negative 7. So the rest of the lesson then is going to use our calculator to find a max and min. So these two boxes have the steps for how we find max and min so that you can refer to them in your homework. So for each problem, we're going to start by typing our equation in. So in y1, we're going to type the given equation, x squared minus 2x minus 8. In y2, we're going to put 0 because we're going to use that later. So once we have that, we are going to hit graph. We can see our u. When we're drawing a graph, we only need to show the parabola, not the horizontal line. So here is our coordinate. Here's our u. Here's our drawing. So when I look at the graph, I have a minimum because we have a low point. So this is our minimum. To find the coordinate of our minimum, we're going to hit second trace. Now usually we pick option 5. But if I'm finding minimum, we see that there is an option for minimum. So we're going to hit number 3. It's going to ask for a left and a right bound. So you don't want to hit enter 3 times. Instead, you want to get the blinking cursor to the left of the minimum. So over here is good enough. Then we're going to move it for the right bound to the right of the minimum. Hit enter. And then when it says guess, we can just hit enter again. It will give us our coordinate. Now, there's a bunch of 9s on there. So when I round that, it would be a 1. So our point would be 1, negative 9 as the vertex. How many zeros does the graph have? So how many times is it crossing the x-axis? It's crossing it in 2 spots. So we have 2 zeros. So to get the coordinates of the zeros, second calc, we're going to go back to our intersect. Now, we can't hit enter 3 times because there's 2 of them. So we need to move our blinking cursor close to 1 so we can tell the calculator which one we want to find. So our first one is negative 2, 0. And we're going to do the same thing. Second trace intersect. We're going to move to the right to be over by the right. Hit enter 3 times, and that would be 4, 0. So let's look at another graph. Negative x squared plus x minus 2. So y equals, we're going to type that in, negative x squared plus x minus 2. y2 is 0. And I'm going to hit graph so we can graph our parabola. This time, because the parabola is opening down, this is going to be a maximum. So when I go to second trace, I want option 4, which is maximum. We're still doing the left and right bound. So we want to be to the left of the vertex and then to the right of the vertex. And hit enter again. And our point would round to 0.50, comma, negative 1.75. So that would be our vertex. Now, for zeros, we're not crossing the x-axis at all, so we would have 0, zeros, which means we have no coordinates of x, and we can move on, or no coordinates of zeros, so we can move on to our next problem. So number 5, we go to y equals. We're going to type 2 parenthesis x plus 9 squared minus 3. We're going to hit graph. Now, this time, I can't see my full parabola, so I need to adjust my window. So in my window, I'm going to change the x min to negative 20 so I can see further to the left. And now I can see my whole parabola. So I'm going to graph my parabola. Because the parabola is opening up, this means we have a minimum, we have a low point. So to find the coordinates, we're going to hit second trace, minimum. We want to be to the left of it. So we don't see the cursor, we need to move it until we get to the left. Hit enter, and we're going to go to the right. Hit enter again, and we end up at negative 9, negative 3. So how many zeros do we have? Well, we're crossing the x-axis in 2 spots, so we have 2 zeros. So to find that coordinate, second trace, go back to intersect, move to the first point on the left, and then hit enter 3 times. So that would be negative 10.22 comma 0. To find the other one, second trace 5, we need to move to the right point, enter 3 times, and that would be negative 7.78 comma 0. Number 6, y equals, we're going to type in negative parenthesis x plus 5 squared plus 15, and then we are going to graph that. So this time, we can't see above. So I'm going to go back in, I'm going to change my x min to negative 10, but I'm going to change my y max to a higher point so we can see the top of our parabola. So now we can see our parabola. So we're going to graph it. And we have our maximum because we're opening down. So to find the vertex, second trace, option 4, move to the left of the vertex. We hit enter. Then we're going to move to the right, hit enter a third time. So that would be at negative 515. Then for zeros, we are crossing the x-axis twice, so we have 2 zeros. So to find that, second trace intersect, move to the left point. So we're moving the cursor to the left. When we get close enough, we hit enter 3 times. So that point would be negative 8.87 comma 0. Then to find the other point, second trace 5, we move to the one on the right. We hit enter 3 times. So we have negative 1.13 comma 0. One more problem that we're going to look at, number 7. We have x squared minus 12x plus 36. Y2, we still want 0 there. We're going to hit graph. We can reset our window so we can change that back to a y max of 10 because we can see our whole parabola. So we're going to draw our parabola, and our parabola is only going to touch the x-axis and then go back up. So in this case, because it is opening up, we have a minimum. So to find the minimum, second trace minimum, we want to go to the left of our graph where the minimum is, enter. Then we want to go to the right of the minimum. Hit enter a third time. So that is going to be 6, 0. Now, how many zeros do we have? Well, we're only intersecting once, which is at the same point as the vertex. We already know the 0 is 6, 0.